Which in-game settings are CPU-bound versus GPU-bound for PC gaming? Imagine you're trying to get the smoothest gameplay possible. Sometimes your game runs great, but other times it stutters or lags. Wondering why? It all comes down to whether your CPU or your graphics card is doing the heavy lifting. In PC gaming, certain settings push your central processing unit or your graphics processing unit to their limits. Knowing which settings affect which component can help you tweak your game for better performance. CPU-bound settings are mainly about the game's brainpower. They involve things like how many objects or characters are on screen, how complex the physics are, and how smart the non-player characters behave. For example, draw distance determines how far you can see in the game world. The more distant objects you want to see, the more your CPU has to process. If you have lots of NPCs or enemies moving around, your CPU is busy calculating their actions and interactions. Physics and simulation details, like vehicle movements or environmental effects, also relying heavily on the CPU. When you increase these settings, your processor has to work harder to keep everything running smoothly. AI complexity, which controls how smart or reactive the non-player characters are, is another CPU-heavy aspect. The more decision-making and behavior calculations needed, the more load on your processor. Game logic, such as event triggers or scripting, also depends on the CPU. If your game has many active characters or a dense population, your CPU gets more taxed. Lowering these settings can help if your game is CPU-bound, meaning your processor is the bottleneck. On the other hand, GPU-bound settings are all about making your game look stunning. These settings depend mostly on your graphics card. Higher resolution settings make your GPU work harder because it has to render more pixels. Texture quality is another big factor. High-resolution textures take up more memory and processing power. Shadows, especially detailed and dynamic ones, are very GPU-intensive because they involve complex lighting calculations. Anti-aliasing smooths out jagged edges, but it also demands more GPU resources. Post-processing effects like bloom, motion blur, and depth of field add visual flair but can slow things down if your GPU isn't up to the task. Lighting effects, especially real-time global illumination and reflections, are also GPU-heavy. Particle effects such as smoke, fire, and explosions requiring lots of rendering power from the graphics card. When you lower these settings, you reduce the load on your GPU, which can lead to higher frame rates, especially at higher resolutions like 1440p or for degrees Kelvin. In most cases, games at high resolutions are GPU-bound because rendering all those pixels is demanding. If you notice your GPU hitting 100% usage while your CPU is underused, your game is likely GPU-bound. Conversely, at lower resolutions or with simplified graphics, the game might be CPU-bound, especially if there are many AI or physics calculations happening. To check this, you can use tools like MSI Afterburner or Windows Task Manager. If your CPU is maxed out and your frame rate is low, focus on lowering CPU-heavy settings like draw distance or NPC activity. If your GPU is maxed out, reducing resolution or texture quality will give you a bigger performance boost. In the end, balancing these settings based on what your system struggles with most will give you the best gaming experience. If your game is CPU-bound, cut back on the number of active objects or physics details. If it is GPU-bound, lower the resolution or disable some of the more demanding visual effects. Knowing which part of your system is the bottleneck helps you make smarter choices for a smoother, more enjoyable gaming session.